A lot of the people in the chat room talking about the transfers. I just saw, TCU just had a guy go into the transfer portal, and a lot of that's going on right now. So that's definitely something we'll keep an eye on. And on that topic of basketball transfer portal news, you weren't here on Friday when LJ Cryer put out his statement on returning to he never really say he's returning to Baylor, but he was insinuated, and then Scott Drew followed it up and insinuated that LJ's coming back. But LJ in his statement did say, he announced that he is going to have surgery on both of his feet, and we'll have a rehabilitation process and all that, but he's trying to get healthy for next year. So since you weren't here, and that's obviously a pretty major storyline for Baylor basketball heading into the next season, I was curious your thoughts on that.
Oh, it's good news because there has been, and I think pretty legitimate, there's 2, 3, 5, 10 people within the message boards, and really for any school, whatever sport it might be, there are some that are tied in very, very well. And I've been in touch with a couple of them who I know have a pretty good direct link to what is going on. They're huge men's basketball fans. But there was smoke that LJ was seriously looking at possibly going somewhere else. The good news is get healthy. Wherever he's going to play again, and if it's Baylor, that's good news. But I don't think, and Scott Drew retweeting that, Alvin Brooks retweeting that, John Jacobs and whoever else did, is obviously a big deal. But I still think there's still a little tug of war about who's coming back and what positions. They could end up, when you look at what they're going to have with Keontae George and what they have coming back with Flagler, and again, that's something he has to still make up his mind. And obviously LJ Cryer, what Bonner did, how much he improved, and his shot will only get better, which is one of the reasons they brought him in.
Langston Love should be healthy.
Langston Love is going to be healthy for the entire year. And he's he could have been monstrous for them. And then there's the James Akinjo piece. And it's kind of like we've had people who have said that he can frustrate you and also be your best player. Kind of like what at times you heard with Matthew Meyer in a different way. But I wonder if there's still a little bit of a tug of war about how many basketballs do you have. Nobody on staff has told me this. But there does need to be, and I think there's no question, as good as he was, as tough as he was, as sometimes he warrior-like in sports terms, and dominant, that there was a lot of lack of ball movement that we saw the year before, and they had 3 guys who are now in the NBA and somebody who's playing in the NFL.
Well, I'll tell you, the biggest difference is, James Akinjo doesn't kind of play that style. Like and they needed him to this year. They needed him to force the issue quite a bit, as where, Baylor last year was, they moved the ball. They had that extra pass a little bit more than Akinjo. Akinjo, drives the paint a lot more before. He's trying to run it and go faster. So it's a different style of basketball. I think they can make it all work. Clearly it was working when they were 15-0 this year and everybody was healthy and playing. So they can make it work, and it will work. I think the biggest thing that Baylor's got to answer is they're going to lose, Sohan and Brown more than likely to the NBA draft. If that doesn't happen, I'll be completely shocked if one or both of those guys came back at all. So they're going to need to address some size, because it looks like they've got guard pretty well covered, and because you don't know what's going to happen with Jonathan Chamwachachua recovering from his injury.
I can't imagine he plays next year at all. If he does, it's a bonus, but I cannot imagine.
I can't imagine he would play early at all. So that's going to have to, if you're being at the most optimistic of a year out, that would be early February when he came back because of that injury. So that puts a lot of pressure on Flo Thamba. Flo Thamba could still leave as well. He could leave. So they've got to focus on size. I think they'll work the guard stuff out. And for LJ Cryer, you're the leading scorer when you left. Why not come back and be the leading scorer again?
What if you are on staff and you have to pick between James Akinjo and LJ Cryer or something like that? LJ didn't play much, and when he did, he was really, really good. Akinjo's an All-American. He's the guy who's a point guard. Do you have a true point guard? And that's kind of one of the things that go ahead. I don't know if you guys were going to respond to that. There is some give and take. There is a little push and pull. There is a little tug of war.
I was just going to say, I don't care how it gets worked out. I just find some guys that could score some points, because that was as much part of your problem as anything. You can say that the defense wasn't the level of the national championship team. Well, nothing was the level of the national championship team. But, if Akinjo's shots weren't dropping, and once Cryer was out of the lineup, it's kind of feast or famine sometimes on who's actually going to put the ball in the bucket. I don't care how it gets done. That would be my philosophy. I don't care if it's Akinjo driving. I don't care if it's dudes shooting threes. I don't care what it is. Just find a way to score some points. And, you should have enough guys in your arsenal to be able to come up with a way to where if one guy's not on one night, there should be more than, one or two other options that you could lean on to try and get you some buckets. But yeah, I think that they've got a good problem and that there's a lot of talent on paper. And, it's a little bit more complicated than just throw them out on the court and let them play. But I would rather deal with this problem where it's like, okay, how can we get the ball to this many guys versus we've really truly only got one guy. How else can we score? I mean, thankfully that's not their problem, but it kind of felt that way at times once Cryer went out. So, I don't know how all that works itself out, but, the more the merrier, in my opinion, because that health piece was a big bump in the road for them this year.
Normally you have a rotation when you get to the tournament. Like we're talking about, Villanova's going to have 6 now because of the injury to Moore. But mainly, most of the time, yes, St. Peter's would bring 5 new bodies in, and that's great when you can. And sometimes that was part of their strength, and that's how they had to do it. But usually you kind of cap it at 7 or 8 when it comes to tournament rotation.
Yeah, you do.
Baylor, though, last year they had off the bench Jonathan Chamwa-Chachua because Flo started, and then you'd bring sometimes Flagler came in off the bench last year. Who am I missing? Anyone else? This year they had Bonner.
Myers.
Matthew Meyer. That's exactly right. So they had the perfect rotation and the perfect type of players, and they were almost a flawless team. This year's team played a lot where they had to bring in people that were Dale Bonner, what he did this year, and yes, his shot was not as good as you thought. He missed 17, 18 straight threes at one point. But he really grew up. You were going to have Langston Love. You didn't. And they fought against that throughout the year. They're not the only team. But, yeah, wouldn't it be nice to have 8 to 10 guys, even though somebody gets disappointed, enters the transfer portal? Okay, so what? You've got 8 or 9 others.
Well, I mean, Scott Drew is already in the black and not in the red when it comes to the transfer portal. So, numbers even out eventually, so maybe it will. But I do think this about Baylor this year. The lasting memory of me will be Adam Flagler just spent. And that was not because of that game in particular. That was because of the weeks before, the extra 4 or 5 minutes you're playing banged up and doing this because the team's out of options and you had to dig deep. Everybody only has so much mileage in their car every year. And Baylor against North Carolina kind of hit their peak mileage right there late. And so if they can throw 8 guys in the rotation and not like if they can do the plan, which is have kind of 9 guys through the season, and then you get in the tournament and the 9th guy plays 2 minutes and the other 8 are the rotation, then that's probably the ideal thing because that's what they did last year.
Yeah, I don't even care how many of the guys they have. Just have some more than 1 scoring option, or more than 2 scoring options. I mean, it's like, oh, Flagler's hurt. We have no one to score points basically, other than James Akinjo trying to. I mean, that was frustrating. But a couple of portal notes. Francisco Farabello, guard from TCU's entered the transfer portal, averaged like less than 5 points per game last year. And then Sean McNeil from West Virginia entering the transfer portal was pretty interesting and a little more eyebrow raising certainly than Farabello. But Sean McNeil from West Virginia also now in the transfer portal. And another note that you missed out on Friday was the Terrence Shannon news. Entering the transfer portal right after they lost at Duke. And as I scoured around on social media and just looking at Tech fans and kind of their responses to it, I don't follow that program on a day-to-day basis as closely as obviously Red Raider fans would. So it was a little bit I don't know if it was – I guess it was somewhat surprising and just a little bit more illuminating that so many already felt like he was, kind of inching that direction. Just me casually following along, I just watching them win games and like, hey, Terrence Shannon's a good player and, whatever. But I guess they had a feeling up there for a little while that this would be a possibility. I don't know if they were predicting that, hours after losing their final game, he'd just jump right in like it was something he had been thinking about. I don't know if it was that clear, but not as much of a shock maybe as it was to me when I just first saw that news. But very interested to see where he goes, and I know that they the Tech fans that I saw wish him well, but also feel like they could be better without him because maybe it wasn't such a great fit throughout the year, especially there for him towards the end and kind of his body language and all that.
And Andre Curbelo, Illinois, entered the transfer portal, a very talented player, but one of the things you see, and I think it's a talk show, we can bring this up. You see someone, my God, he's talented. Another one goes, Yeah, but I don't know if you want him. Again, a lot of it's a fit, a cultural fit. And sometimes guys can change when they go to where they go.
Here's what you need to do. You need to trust your coaches. If you have a good coach, usually they pick out the guys that are cultural fit. And I actually think, just knowing, because we know this coaching staff here at Baylor better, what Scott Drew's been able to do is lately the guys they get fit the culture, and he has the ability to not have to take a guy and hope to wedge him in, and that he takes the culture. It's pretty much, you're here and you like the way that we do things from the jump. And that's what you're able to do for being in a place for 19, 20 years and winning a title. Some places have to take chances on guys and hope they can fit the culture.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be a player who comes in and changes the culture towards you at Baylor. Yeah. You're going to either fit in or you're going to be out. I mean, that's pretty simple. That's the way that program operates now. So that's the way they all should operate. Should be the coach's way and not about the star player. But yeah, the transfer portal is going to be really fun to watch. And apparently there's already some women who have already entered the transfer portal as well. That's ongoing. And so we'll, just be keeping track of that, just like with football, every day, I guess, for the time being, because it's, news constantly as far as this thing goes.
I got a text on Friday when I was taking the afternoon off to play a round of golf from somebody that covers Louisiana Tech and was asking me about Alvin Brooks III, who's part of Scott Drew's staff. I sent him a text. He said, I'm very thrilled and happy to be a part of the winning culture at Baylor. So that was out. That was something that was kind of out there. New Mexico State, La Tech, according to Austin Massey, covers Texas Tech. We've had him on a couple of times. Talvin Hester, assistant coach at Tech, expected to be named the new head coach at Louisiana Tech. And Mark Adams, of course, now will fill that spot and have many options to do it. And then this story that was on